And recording is on.
Hey, thank you, Bill. And thank you to our organizers for the e-learning consortium of Colorado, for the virtual learning conference, and for all of you for attending. I know it's the end of a long day, so some of you will be watching the video, maybe just getting the slides or asking questions in the future. So let's take a look. Well, I work for several universities, but I spend most of my time with CCCOnline and with Colorado Technical University. And yes, I'm standing here at the bridge for Alice in Wonderland, for taking that dive down the rabbit hole. And I've been thinking about this topic for maybe 16 years. And of course, I talk about futuring. I give keynotes at futuring conferences, and I think about how do we shape the future? How do we take charge? And so today I'm going to invite you to offer your ideas in the text chat. Now, if you're not comfortable, and of course my text chat just disappeared, right? There we go. If you're not comfortable sharing ideas, jot them down at your end, because we want you to have them as tools for your future. So don't disappear. You don't have to stress over the participation part. I've given you lots of ideas here to stimulate your thinking. Now, this is one of my favorite images. When I see this, I always think of how I feel about a good book. The smell, the feel of the paper, the great words that are within it, the images, the places it takes me. And I feel this way about a great class too. And I want you to think about this because in 2020, we didn't feel like this. Wasn't the magical educational experience we were hoping for those of us who have the calling to teach. Instead, how many of you felt like this? I want to see some chatter in the text chat. In my sessions and in my classes, I feel alone if no one's talking to me. Yeah, I feel disconnected. Hey, welcome. This wasn't the pandemic we were looking for. No, okay. And in fact, I saw it coming. That's the really horrible part. And I was teaching data analytics at the time, so I started modeling everything. I grabbed the first 108,000 patient records and started studying them in January, when some people really didn't think this was happening. They thought, oh, this must just be a news flash or a little blip somewhere in Wuhan, or not important here. And of course, I was very worried. And my world felt like it was upside down because while I am a bit of a hermit and I work online a lot, I didn't expect the rest of the world to join me there. So, there's this notion. How many of you are familiar with things called the third space or the second space when we talk about this? If you think about the first space as your home, right? Your castle, your security, your safety. And you think about your second space as either work or school, right? For students, for some of our students, it's both. They work professionally, they study. And the second space is where they devote much of their time. That's their mind space, right? And they're producing, creating, thinking, and of course, learning. And then the third space is a social space where they also do some learning. And that is where they gather with friends, they feed the spirit, they do all these things that give them a well balanced, hopefully stress free or well stressed managed life, right? And of course, in 2020, everything went home. All of a sudden, our work and our social spaces are home with us, and all of them are suffering. And we were on the quest for balance. So, something I want you to think about. And I know you're going, why do I care in education? Well, this is one reason. Wenger asks us to think about these things, these theories of practice, situated experience, social structure, and identity. Why do they matter? And how can we nurture and create learning spaces that make it easier for people to learn, more comfortable to learn, and also support any future stresses we might have with pandemics or whatever, right? Now, I don't know if the camera is disturbing or discordant. I don't want to be interrupting my lovely little slides here. So I'm going to stop the camera for now and let me know if I need to get back to it. Okay, so look at this. My research partner featured this image in our recent talk, and I thought about this and I said, this so beautifully expresses how I was feeling. I mean, I love being home, and I love working from home, but I don't like feeling isolated from colleagues. I certainly don't like feeling isolated from students. How many of you felt like this? Like you had this beautiful little space, but unfortunately the island was way too small. There wasn't enough home. There wasn't enough space to really connect with others and to feel good about the experience. We needed something more. But I don't see any chat in the text chat, so I'm going to continue and I'll be telling some stories. Now, I want you to think for a moment. If your home was your learning space, which it was in 2020, right? How would you want to communicate with your students? Now, when I say how, I don't just mean over Zoom, over the phone, face to face. I also, I, the technology is part of it, but also what exactly do you want to be saying and how do you want to be saying it? You know, what is it that makes that connection real for you, vibrant, alive? What do you need to feel good? Now, I know, I hear this all the time from some of my colleagues at one of my schools. They say, well, students don't need to be happy in class. They just need to get the work done. And why do you need to feel good, Cynthia? I said, well, if I'm not happy, no one else is. When I'm happy, I guess I'll turn the camera back on. When I'm happy, everyone else can feel it, right? We set the tone. We set this environment, which isn't just a physical environment. It's not just a learning system. It's not just a game environment, whatever it is. There's a lot more to it than that. And of course, we are designing a space where it'll be memorable. This connection of concepts, skills, applied learning, activity-based learning, and then of course, authentic assessment. And then for me, boy, I need Jarvis from Iron Man. I don't know about you. I need a digital assistant who has a snarky little attitude, right? Give me a little trouble. And to also help me manage things like grades and feedback, almost like not just like a TA, but I mean a smart version of myself who's always on time with things. I want because I want to have this aesthetic magical experience with students, that Dead Poet Society moment, the carpe diem, the getting out and see when I decided to become an educator, my role models were to serve with love. Good morning, Miss Dove. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. All of these experiences where people get together with learners and put them in different spaces mentally, make them think differently about the world and give them the tools to learn better. Well, I'm going to give you a few today too. And of course, some of them you already know, right? So, one of my students shared this in our futuring class, an image of Fallingwater. It's at fallingwater.org. It's by Frank Lloyd Wright. And I looked at this and I said, I would love to be in that house. Of course, the sound of running water constantly might be a little hard on me, but but what a magical place, right? I don't know how they get there, but I love it. And of course, I started thinking about my dream home. And do you know, for the last 32 years, 33 in a month, every year on my birthday, I get together with my family and we get either a pad of paper or a tablet. Over the decades, it's changed, right? And we write down our dreams for the future. And we start with our home. And so I want to invite you to think about your home since it was your learning space in the sense of your physical learning space, right? That's where you worked from last year, most of us, unless you were in a very unique community. We were all home. And so now the question is what would your home look like and what would be inside it? And what do you need for it to be this magical place where you feel extremely comfortable and vibrant, on fire? It's like you've been to 3 conferences and you are ready to roll, right? What's in your home? And of course, when I do this with students, and you can type some of these things out if you wish in the text chat. When I do it with students in our futuring class, I am first asking them about their home, and then I ask them about their career and their education. What would you like to learn? And I want you to imagine you have all the time, money, and talent in the world. It doesn't matter how old you are. That does not matter. It does not matter that you don't have unlimited resources. You do today. And talent isn't an issue. So if you want to be on Mars, by golly, there you are. So we're not going to worry about reality. We're not going to have these boundaries that hold us back. And that's the important part of visioning, is to let go of your constraints and your limitations. Constraints are things you must do, the things that set a boundary around us that we must comply with. Oh, it must be FERPA compliant. Oh, it must be accessible. Absolutely. It will be those things. By golly, we're going to make those happen. So now, assuming that all of that is possible, what's in your dream space? Well, I'm going to show you a few ideas because I know some of you are thinking, I can't dream about that stuff. That's not practical. What's wrong with you? I love Richard Millwood's dissertation. I'm one of these nutcases who reads dissertations for fun, right? And he wrote one, I think in England, and he worked with the European Union as well to create this diagram you see on the right. And I know it's hard to read. The intent is not to read it. Well, what's cool about it is he takes the giants in the field for learning theories and he thinks about them in his conceptual framework on the left. And he groups them around the learning experience, which includes some of the activities you're doing at your homeschool, whether it's instructional design and curriculum design, whether it's technology design, right? The tools we need to actually make these things happen, the learner-centric needs, technology boundaries, and of course, the education, all the things we need. Now, he took the giants in the field, they're in this rosy color, and he took their disciplines and then the major theories they're known for. And then he has this wonderful little way of looking at it all. And there's a C map. I guess I could show you real quick. Let's see if I have it up. Always a good question, right? Let's see. Yeah, I do. This is a C map of it. I'll give you the link here in the text chat. And these links, by the way, are in the slides. And the slides, by the way, are located here. They're online in slideshare.net, and you can get them from the conference. But here, this is all interactive. That's what a CMAP does, is it's a concept map that allows you to click on things and bring up other related material. So he created this as part of his dissertation, one of his outcomes. And his goal was to think about how all these things come together to support technology enhanced learning. So back to our slides. And yes, I'm like this in class, but it's this notion that we have to be able to gather all our tools, and that includes how things are done, why we do them that way, because we don't want to abandon all our good theory, the things that work for us, right? Now, some of you may think, well, that thing on the left, I don't believe in that. I love the learning pyramid, and here's why. When I think about online education, or even in the classroom, when I taught face to face, and I've been teaching for 25 years, poor Bill's going, she didn't introduce herself. I used to work for Air Force Space Command before I got my doctoral degree in computer science, and now I've been teaching for the last 26 years for a variety of schools, but in particular for Colorado Technical University and for CCCOnline. And 5%, if I stood up in the lecture and talked to the students and they just listened passively, like you seem to be at the moment, right? You'll remember 5% of what I'm saying. That's a dismal thought. It's like, oh my God. You might remember that it was entertaining or not, or that you believed or didn't, but the value of that experience is not as key as moving down the pyramid. Now, if you're just reading what I say or looking at my slides, well, that's not enough because there isn't that involvement, that engagement. Same with watching video and just looking at demonstrations. So one of our goals in online learning, and while we're working from home, is to get people to talk, that discussion. There's thoughts that not only do they remember 50%, but if they say the wrong thing, thank you, Kay. If they say the wrong thing, they'll remember even better. So do you know, in my classes, I encourage wrongness. And how's that for breaking the learning theory? Because if we learn better because of the discomfort it causes us when we make mistakes. Now the question is, what does that do for us for long-term learning, for remembering and applying these skills 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Now, the practice by doing I am key about, and that's the reason I like working in virtual worlds, teaching in game spaces, is because my students create content. They practice by doing. And then they teach others. They explain it to others, and they have to also, support it and show why does it matter, right? That's right. Disorienting dilemmas and deliberate difficulties. Kay adds. Now, on the right, the flow model is critical to our work in education, but also in games. If the challenge level along the bottom there, if people are, excuse me, the skill level along the bottom, if their skill level is high, right, we have to increase the challenge proportionally. But we know that in the classroom, we get people from all walks of life, right? Especially if you have open enrollment, you may have folks who may or may not be adequately prepared for that class only because they self-selected to give themselves more of a challenge, right? And we let them. But now the question is, as educators and curriculum designers, how do we get them to arousal and flow, which is this notion that the challenge level is slightly above their skill level. It causes them to stretch, but not too far. And the reason I'm showing it to you, I know you already know this, is is if we all stepped into game-based worlds or virtual worlds, or it would look like Ready Player One, in our educational environments, some of you would be having high anxiety, and it's because if you're not familiar with those things, that's a high challenge level, high steep learning curve, right? To get used to those tools while you're not as familiar with them. That's what we mean by skill level, right? Your familiarity is low. So we recognize that both for what we're teaching and how we teach it and the tools we use, all of these things have to come together, right? Absolutely, the positive psychology. So Rebecca's giving you the link on that. Thank you, Rebecca. Wonderful. So these slides are to encourage our thinking. And of course, I love this slide. This comes from my research group. And we're thinking not just about augmented reality or virtual reality, but we're also thinking about what is it we value. Now, there's a conference coming up later this month. I'm not doing a plug for it, so don't panic. It's virtualability.org is hosting it. And I know many of you have passion for accessibility. It's not just because it's required by law. It's because, we can't talk about diversity and not support every one of us, right? And so virtualability.org is hosting this conference. It's called a mental health conference. And of course, among some, there's a stigma to that, right? It's like, oh, that must be the lack of mental health, right? And no, it's really thinking about, why do we see garden spaces all throughout this image? Why are gardens important to us? Why do we need these imaginative green spaces to feel good about ourselves? Why do we need this? Well, I attended that conference in 2017, every year, frankly. And there was a lady who spoke. She did a study out of Canada. She had degrees in architecture and medicine, and she talked about the high rate of suicide among physicians and nurses in Canada, and based on their work conditions and the lack of green spaces. But then she talked about patients in critical care, patients that they did not expect to thrive, where they pulled the plug and they just didn't die, and they wondered what was going on there. And of course, they don't have evidence to show any correlation, so we're not going to assume that at all. But she noticed that in many cases, as they're, like a dying wish, they would show them green spaces. They would put them near a window if there was a garden nearby. Because let's face it, the ICU is not a friendly place, right? There's no green spaces. And then, of course, or they'd put them in a virtual world, or they'd expose them to video with these lush Irish landscapes that are just this gorgeous color of green. And they started noticing things when we put people in these spaces, what happens to them psychologically. Now, I'm not suggesting correlation, but all I'm saying is, in my learning space, even though I'm allergic to things that grow, right? I still have plants behind me, and you may be able to see a few of them hanging down, right? I have things all over me because I need these green spaces to feel centered, and I need my technology to integrate with what is natural and vibrant. I was inspired by University of British Columbia and Oxford back in like 2006, 2007, when they launched this project and presented it at the TCC conference. It's called Ancient Spaces. And at that time, they asked the question, what would happen if our students created these virtual spaces for us? And what if they were first year students without any prior knowledge on how to use the tools? And what if they were creating spaces that we could then weave together, almost like a massive multiplayer online game, only it's not a game in the sense of having, battle and win conditions like that, but it's a game in the sense that you step inside it and you can go on archaeological digs, or you could have these authentic experiences with this content. That was really a brilliant concept. And of course, the only difficulty is, of course, funding, support, and our naysayers, the folks who keep us honest, right? They say, hey, that'll never work. And of course, this project continued for several years. It just didn't reach launch because there are technical issues. You need people from all walks of life to support this kind of project. It was a monumental effort, but it inspired me. And of course, I spent the next 15, 16 years spinning off those ideas. Now, this is something I did for Burning Man a few years ago, and I was thinking about why it matters, the things we read and learn from childhood to today. And The Little Prince was one of my favorite books. I don't know if anyone else liked it, and I translated my way, okay? I read it in the French. And of course, my favorite quote is, "It is only with the heart that one can see clearly. What is essential is invisible to the eyes." So when I try to explain the magic of learning and the magic of these spaces, this is what I think about. I think about the fox talking about being tamed and how we become responsible for the things we tame. Of course, he's explaining to the little prince they can't be friends until you tame me. But it's this notion that what is our responsibility to each other, and what are these connections? Now, this one should look familiar to Kay and Chris. This is their build, in a virtual world, you bet. And of course, I know it's not ISTE's Metagame Book Club, but you have to realize they are leaders in the Games and Simulations Network for ISTE, and they also host the Metagame Book Club. And of course, this is from Ready Player One, and that gave us an image of education in the future that for some it might have horrified, and for others it stimulated, right? Oh, thank you, Rebecca, on that shout out for virtual ability. And see, I'm education chair of the nonprofit Commons, and virtual ability is one of our groups. All nonprofits from around the world get together every Friday morning and think about education, and think about social good, and think about how to sustain the spirit, how to provide better accessibility tools, and how to bring all of these magical spaces, both the fantastical and the real, together to provide a whole environment. Now, you may say to yourself, why fantastical? Well, let's face it, among some of our members, they're not ambulatory. Some cannot hear, some cannot see. We have people of all different kinds of abilities, and then many of us are older, right? So, of course, we need spaces that empower us and invigorate us, and of course, keep us alive. Now, here's another shout out to Elk, right? 2017, and Barbara Truman's there on the right, who was the keynoter that we had several keynotes, but she was one of them. I'm in the center, and there's Kay. But how do we feel? I look at this picture with such fondness, and I do not flinch. I do not think, ooh, where's my 6 feet of distance? I don't think about that at all. In fact, I miss these days. And I think this is important to us. Somehow we have to preserve these connections and not suffer from the negative consequences of social distancing. Now, often I'm told, oh, okay, that's fine. You have us in game-based worlds or virtual worlds, but I like realism. I like knowing who's teaching or who's in the classroom. So on the Moses project, we worked on photogrammetry and on realism. And you'll notice there, uh, the gentleman, he was a soldier who was part of our group. It was sponsored by the US Army. That's him on the left, and that's his virtual world avatar on the right. And the way we capture that is with this homegrown setup we have with over 90 cameras at its last look. We take all those photos and then we map them together to create the skin you see in the lower right corner of Doug Maxwell. And the process, part of the software and the process is there in the center. This is about a month's worth of work to capture and model someone like this. Well, yeah, really. Actually, yeah, she's talking about the previous image. It looks like we coordinated, but we didn't. But everyone can always count on me being in basic black. It goes with everything, right? But yes, so realism. I find this a little in the uncanny valley and a little creepy. And here's why. I don't like the thought of someone else wearing my skin. And you can just wear this thing, right? It also reminds me of Mission Impossible, where they're masquerading as, or any kind of fiction movie where someone has put on enough makeup or latex to look like someone else, right? That's disturbing to us. We already have problems with our financial identity, our online identity. The last thing we need is our physical identity also being worn by others. Then I think about, okay, why games? Why do we see so much about game-based learning? Well, Jane McGonigal talked about the powers, the actual soft skills that we're encouraging that wind up being important life skills. And I don't know if you've seen this list before. I took her list and turned it into this bookmark. And then I added my own definitions for it. And it bridges with Howard Rheingold's work. And then she created this amazing game at the Schwarzkopf Library in Manhattan, to encourage people to get together and to create these amazing spaces. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It happened on my birthday, I think in 2012. So it was May 20th. And what they did was they did a night in the library where everyone came and they had to spend the night and they had to find 100 artifacts that had very little story behind them. No one knew their stories. And they had to write little sections about it and then get 56 signatures of the attendees to get it published. And in the morning, they were going to publish it, print it, and put it next to the Gutenberg Bible and the handwritten copy of the Declaration of Independence. Now, that's a powerful thought. Imagine you participating in a learning event that the next day would become part of these two important documents in history. Well, they had 5,000 people sign up. Everyone wanted to go to the library for the night. And of course, they couldn't support that many. Only 500 were permitted to attend. And the reason they needed 56 signatures is because that's the number of signatures of the brave people who signed the handwritten Declaration of Independence, right? And so they were modeling off of that schema, right? Well, this is an amazing event for them, but not just that moment in time. For life, they and their families have access to the rare book area at that library because they are co-authors of a rare book. So what are the gamer powers? Well, mobility is this notion that we have scalable collaboration. We can get people together. We can get things done. We have a cooperation radar that helps us to sense the best collaborators and encourage them to participate. Ping quotient, we're responsive to requests. We have a lot of media coming at us. You know, I often hear educators tell me, I want to stop cell phones in the classroom, or I want to make people not get on their smartphones, not get on their laptops, not have all these distractions. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe we need to somehow transfer that energy and think about how to leverage it in really creative ways. Give them time based activities that encourage them to find the best data and to tell the best stories and to model that experience in the library, right? Influency, our influence on one another through our social environments and media. That's so important. Multi-capitalism. I don't have to read this list to you, but maybe protovation's new to you. That's the fearless, rapid uh, willingness to innovate in the face of possible failure, right? I do too, Kay. And then open authorship. This is so important to us right now, is the fact that people share, right? Well, now let's get into our discomfort zones. Many of you talk about pedagogy, and I wanted you to know how I think about it. And my thinking may be wrong, okay? I will admit this because I'm not a learning theorist. I get exposed to it at conferences, and this is number 320, right? So I listen a lot. I go to a lot of writers' conferences. I think about how people think. And for me, pedagogy is determined and directed by the school and the educator, by the instructional, the SME, the curriculum support folks. It's all dictated. And so it's not choices of the learner. And I know you're thinking to yourself, well, that's a good thing because they'd make bad choices. And that's possible. But I want to invite you for a moment to think about how adults learn. How do you learn? I don't know about you. I used to take little surveys in every class for many, many years. I've been teaching over 25 years. And I'd ask the class, the first 2 weeks of class, how many of you opened the book? How many of you read the book? And of course, there'd always be one out of 30, right? And then there'd be two or three who had skimmed the book. They'd flip the pages, almost like hieroglyphics becoming animation. And then some had looked at some of the call outs, the images, etc. Others had it but hadn't opened it, might still be in shrink wrap. If it was a physical book, if it was digital, they hadn't read it yet. So andragogy is how adults learn. We go look things up after it no longer supports our behavior or when we have questions. So one of our goals, if we're nurturing andragogy, is to stimulate those questions, right? To give them activities that um, set them on fire, right? That Fiero experience. And then hudagogy. Now, I teach a lot of doctoral classes, right? And so I'm always encouraging self-determined learning. But I don't think that's the realm solely of doctoral scholars. I think it's everyone's opportunity. Many of us, I don't know about you, but the reason I love teaching is I wanted to be a professional student. I wanted to stay in this nurturing, wonderful environment where people praise you for doing good work. I don't I don't just mean it in the workplace. I mean the relationship we have with students. Students do work, we give them recognition for it. That's a wonderful mechanism if you think about it. So hudagogy, that's self-determined learning and keeping that pump going of wonderful new information, stimulus, vibrancy, and then that great feedback, right? But it's determined and directed by the learner. So there's this transfer of energy that I find interesting, and I keep encouraging it. I mentored 400 eighth graders for Peggy Sheehy in a virtual world during the Ramapo project in 2007 through 2009. That's what I did during the day. And then I worked at night, right? Teaching and grading and doing all the things we do. And I learned so much from the kids. But one of the first things I learned is that if you give them enough room to maneuver and all the various tools and some creativity options, it's amazing what they get accomplished. It's not just them, though. Here we are at a conference, and we've asked educators to create a learning game. And of course, we're doing it with our bodies, right? That's us as avatars. The guy with the construction hat, Bill, is of course coordinating it, Agile Bill. And of course, we're all taking a stand for our ideas and deciding where would our pieces go and how would we do this. But we don't just have to do board games. We don't just have to do commercial games. My group creates entire environments in open source worlds. This is one of them, that where we're currently conducting research to see how we can investigate complex problems. So we're thinking, thank you, Rebecca. She is amazing. And she, of course, Peggy Sheehy has been she has inspired us with WOW in School and her bridging work with others for these National Science Foundation grants with Minecraft in School and other programs. So I love spaces like this with lots of technology, lots of information, lots of gizmos, and I've created them or supported them. More often than not, I test them and complain bitterly, right? And say, hey, I needed to do this. And the good news is we make it do that. These are my classes. Since 2005, I've been teaching in a virtual world, not all the time. I teach with learning management systems, and in these classes, I also had them. The lower left is actually from the Hong Kong Institute of Technology, and I'm there as a guest. And their students are demonstrating as part of a conference some of their learning activities in the medical practice. But mine at the top, you'll notice I often smile when someone asks me what my diversity practices are, and I says, everyone's welcome. The light bulb, the robot, the box, I have box bots who are students, everyone is welcome. No one, everyone has a seat. The reason we're seated is I learned that people get more fatigued in these spaces if they're standing, moving, and not relaxed. So whenever possible, we learn to sit. Plus, you know what I do? I take that whole learning platform and I wheel it around. I move it places. So I move the learners to the content or the content to the learners, but they don't have to do the work themselves. So I do reduce some of the cognitive load, right? On the lower right, those are just one class's projects. And of course, they've created all that stuff. And what I have done is I've layered it. So they're each like 200 or 300 meters in the air. And I pulled my camera back so you can see the entire island. And that's just one of 3 islands I was using for classes. And of course, we can go 7,000 meters into the air. So we can each have our own personal spaces that look like personal spaces. Here's one of them. That's us standing on one of the middle layers. You'll notice I've made the floor see-through so they don't have this claustrophobic sense. So they can see the world around them and see other projects, even as they're working on theirs. In this case, I had a physics student who was working on gravity, and he designed this wonderful thing. I can show it to you if you're interested, but he designed this wonderful thing where when you're standing as the astronaut, you can be standing on the moon, the earth, or Mars. You change the grass by clicking on it, and you add a hammer or a feather into his hands, and then you can test how gravity works in these 3 different planets, these different environments, different materials, etc. And he teaches high school physics. So he was trying to think of ways to take story problems and make them come to life for his students. And he did so. It was wonderful work. Meanwhile, in 2020, one of our friends, her son was graduating from college. And of course, students missed their graduation ceremonies. They missed. Oh, what was the software used for this? Was it this one here that you're asking, Amika? This is actually set in Second Life, but we now do this in Open Sim, which is an open source version. So this is 3D Prim based building. Students create projects in 1 to 2 weeks. Sometimes they'll take 3 or 4 weeks if they're very involved and they're a team project, a collaborative. And I'm going to show you examples of those too. And then we refine them. We hold these little poster sessions like what you're seeing right here, where we walk around, we talk about it. Everyone offers ideas on how to strengthen it or use different strategies. And so this is a working session prior to midway through the class.
Sorry.
Yes.
Can you put a link to that since it's open source? Can we get that?
Oh, for open source, yeah. Let me
it doesn't have to be now.
Okay. I am a right now kind of person. So when you say things, this is how I teach, right? What we're using, just so you know, we're using opensimilar.org.
Okay.
And I can show you some more information about that in just a little bit, because I have some more examples. I'm so glad you asked that question, though, because see, I'm so familiar with this that I forget that not everyone's made the journey with me. This is the same. So you were looking at a commercial Second Life version. This right now that you're looking at here is on our privately hosted. That means it's running off of a computer in a farmhouse in Alabama, where my research partner lives. And we're all standing there. On Sundays, we get together and we make this stuff that you see on screen. And this guy in the front was graduating, and we said, well, let's hold a graduation ceremony for him. And so we gave him a cap and gown and, and the whole 9 yards. And of course, we took him sailing. We had resible sailboats. Everyone gets their own and goes sailing. Then we went scuba diving, and we had submersible, like little submarines, almost like something out of a Thunderball or one of the James Bond movies. But that's us down there swimming with him. And this is us. These regions all exist in our research area where we teach. I hold classes. I held classes in fall of 2020, where we have apartments. So our home space has expanded. It's not just this physical space you see behind me and above me, because I live in an open space house. There's no walls, right? So of course I have to I angle the camera so I can get a little privacy. But here I'm here with Barbara Truman sitting at the piano. This is her little apartment, her house, and we're all gathered together here. Here is Andy Strickers, who's designed a lot of this, and he loves Gothic architecture and all these beautiful arches and books. And so remember, I asked you in the beginning to think about your dream space. What kind of library would you have? Would you have a 2-story? Would you? Oh, and see, Rebecca's asked a wonderful point. So let me pause on that. How do you promote the added germane cognitive load of learning how to comfortably interact within the software? Well, I think it's partly we begin with socialization, Rebecca. You notice we're all seated. We move through these spaces. We use the devices. So we make it natural. And that's such a good question. I didn't organize a talk for this conference on teaching for the saints, but I taught for St. Martin's University. And I taught students who were undergraduates and graduates and from many disciplines. We decided to open it up beyond engineering and computer science because I said to myself, well, we're going to have this magical class. We should let everyone come, right? And so we did. And the problem with everyone is what you're describing right there. Cognitive load is the burden on our ability to think and reason, right? You get confronted with all this stuff and you go, what do I touch to move my body? How do I stand up? How do I do these things? So you know what we did? We made a game out of it, Rebecca. And I actually built the assessments within the world. So the students didn't have the traditional forms of testing and quizzes and all the things that have fear tactics associated with them. Instead, I'd ask them to sit or to do things and they would. And I could certainly show you some of that too, if you'd like to see it. This is me. My apartment's really small. They knew I loved books. So guess what they give me? They give me the world's smallest little, it's the size of this linoleum you see here on the bottom. That's the entire room, but it is filled with books, so I can't complain. But this is me in the open source world, you know, carving out my identity and of course the things that I love, right? But to answer your question, look in the upper right there. Those students are creating a game within the landscape of this world. So the landscape starts out looking like an island or looking like a bare piece of land, right? Unlandscaped, right? And of course they start constructing things and they start adding little scripts to them. They add textures. But what really makes it come alive is the theory behind it. You'll notice behind them, they have game elements, they have pedagogy, they have all the different constructs you would need to create a learning game that had substance and also offered assessments, right? Yeah, you guys can share your opinions. And Kay, if you wanted to speak for a moment, I could also pause here. We're doing great on time.
I was, part of that answer was snarky.
Oh yeah.
But part of it, and it
That's
wasn't
because
Rebecca.
I asked the question.
Yeah, no, it wasn't because Rebecca asked the question. Okay, it was because as the information and technology literacy mentor at my college, that question comes up all the time. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's some rationales, and Chris can jump in too, because when I was embedded in some of his classes for technology grants, we would get this question.
Yeah.
And
Well,
go ahead.
It is. It's a very common question. And I always like to hear everybody else's thoughts around how they dealt with it, how they answered it, because I mean, I find that they are very similar. So yeah, that was the only reason.
Oh, okay. So Chris, what did we tell your accounting students when they were asking?
Oh, about extraneous cognitive load. Like,
Yeah, about
like
why
I'm not a gamer.
Yes, I'm not a gamer.
Well, what I told them was basically, I don't want you to be a gamer. That's not what I'm testing you on. What I'm testing you on is the application of accounting concepts in this new environment and business concepts within this new environment. Because what was interesting is the folks that were most against using a platform like World of Warcraft or a virtual environment to explore business or accounting were those that had that were doing work in real world context, and we were taking them away from what they thought they knew and having them apply those contexts into a new model. So it's what they were used to, breaking them out of that inertia, breaking them out of that, well, I'm already at rest, I have a very fixed understanding of my environment, breaking them of that to help them learn a new environment and then apply these new skills within that new framework, and really focus on the application of business skills. So that way the goal was to have them apply these in any situation, not in their current, it's great if they can apply them in their current situation, but for many of my students, especially accounting students, their goal wasn't to stay in their same position. Their goal was to grow into a new position or transfer into another company, grow into another position within the company and move forward. And so it's like, well, you're going to be doing something different. And so this is getting you comfortable with change, because if you can understand how to apply these concepts within a virtual environment where you have no example, where you have no experience in, then it's something that lets you that fresh start. Because then it's really fundamentally mastering those core concepts.
And then the other thing about it, and you have to realize I'm a bit blunt, but with some of the students, if they went, well, I'm older, I can't learn this technology. And I would say, you're right. So you need to learn this technology, because when you get your job, people are going to expect you don't know how to use these things, and you need to be able to prove the different. As they were younger, it was like, look, you're younger, and they're going to expect that you know how to use all these things. So you better, so you better be able to know how to use it. But quite honestly, besides my snarky answer, the other answer for information and technology literacy, that this is a technology literacy, being able to use simulations, being able to go to games and use them is something that might give you a competitive advantage. In the morning show, Krista has been showing up, and we've just had her talking about, she's talking about TikTok and Snapchat. But I will tell you at the same time that we just talked about the social media ones. That girl can go into any kind of virtual space, any kind of game, and quickly orient herself. And I'm going to stop.
Yeah, see, that degree of poise and adaptability, flexibility, resilience, and all these qualities mattered so much in 2020, and of course beyond. Here Gaston Bachelard talks about the topo analysis montage, and we created this activity in our cloud computing class, which of course doesn't look like cloud computing, right? You would expect that to be all technology oriented, and there's a lot about that. But we also asked the students to create a project where they created their discovery space. What is it like when you discover things? And we had them model this in a virtual world. We had them model their actuality of being. That's accomplishment, things that help identify you and your place in the universe. The private space, the things that feed your spirit that are really individual, and you need those, right? The daydreaming space, and then the friendship space. And so we had them model all these things, and then we mapped that out to our cloud computing experiences. So we were thinking about the philosophy, and I know you're thinking, wait a minute, how could they model all that? Well, we have many different ways to do it. And so think of a virtual world as an integrator of technologies. Anything that sits on the web, I can integrate into this 3D space. Now, it won't necessarily be 3D when I bring it in, right? I could be making HTTP calls to various sites and tools and stuff. So I have to be rather clever if I wanted to then come alive and be a 3D scene or a 3D simulation or a game that has behavior, right? That reacts to me and interacts. The advantage of these spaces is they're not passive. They're not video. When you interact with objects, they react to you. So you are part of the organism you're studying. And that's a very powerful thought for students because it creates a mnemonic and a collection of ways of thinking about the experience that matters. Now, you're right, there's a little struggle, but we keep the struggle fairly reasonable. I do. I keep it lightweight because I'm not teaching virtual world subjects in most of my classes. There were 3 or 4 classes where I taught simulation design and game design, but otherwise we were teaching totally different subjects in computer science, information technology, software project management, systems engineering, etc. Right? A lot of sciences. But I also taught classes where we thought about privacy and information accountability. We thought about a variety of experiences. I let the students choose what the topics are going to look like and how they're going to model their projects. In our professional work, we bring that in too, and we invite the students to participate. So we do analysis of leadership growth. We think about character strengths. We think about virtues, and values-based leadership. And we think about historical situations. And so we model them. And this is the McMurdo Station. And of course, one of our goals, and of course, Kay is an expert here at German linguistics, but we use Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft to talk about the importance of community, of our families, and then the importance of society. In other words, not being on these isolated little islands at home, viewing out into Zoom, or I call Zoom Hollywood Squares because we all look like we're in our own little square, right? That old game show. I need to be out of that and bridge and anchor with others, right? So I need this expanded notion of society and the neighborhood, right? And so here we are at McMurdo Station where we're studying the Shackelford discoveries and some of the historical things that mattered. And of course, we don't worry about the fact that penguins and polar bears really aren't running around together on this station. We have them here for fun. But, and of course, a polar bear showing up with his own bring your own bottle, right? We had a BYOB day. We have a lot of whimsy going on in some of the things we design. We also have things that feed the spirit, like the tea ceremony and cultural moments where we think about why do these things matter? Why are they important to us? How can we, what could we study in these kinds of environments? So we let our students use some of our environments, right? They don't have to build everything themselves. So as we think about moving from the home, from family and community, the Gemeinschaft, to Gesellschaft, the society, the learning, the campus, the learning management system, the course tool, the learning environment. Remember, the goal for today is to think about if we had all the resources in the world, no exploding parrots, that's funny. I actually have a parrot on my shoulder in several scenes. But back in the bookstore, I had a parrot. I had a cardinal on my shoulder. I had a parrot in class, but good one. But it's this notion that as we think about our expanded learning space, and you think of it starting as your home, and then you think about it bridging with others and inviting them to be part of that learning experience, please realize COVID is not a one-shot. This might be something that we have to address in the future as well. And so we have this amazing opportunity to dream big and to think, what would you want in your ideal learning environment? What would you want for you to learn? What's ideal to you? And of course, for us, we said, wow, it's a rough year. Let's model Pompeii. They had it rough too. And of course, I had to laugh because I said, oh, yeah. We'll do it before, before the volcano. But and we even created chariot races, and these are on resers. So we have all these technologies that are reusable. And we offer these scripts to our students. They're little programs that are already written. They just drag them into an object. If you can drag and drop into the contents, which is a folder within an object, you can make that object have this behavior. And so we teach them, how do you make things that are resable, where you click it, it appears, you use it, and when you get off of it, it deletes itself. It self-cleaning environments. That was another thing I wanted on my wish list. No one's told me all theirs. Absolutely, you want godlike powers, but I want a Jarvis too. Because I need a buddy to talk to who's going to be snarky. Maybe it has Kay's voice. You know, I'd love that. Serious, because it doesn't have to be a guy like from the movie, but it has to be a very smart, very snarky, wonderful, the person who keeps you honest, right? The person who feeds your spirit and helps you get things done. Absolutely. Did you have something to add there, Kay?
Oh no! All I was gonna say, because the whole time you've been doing this, I've been going, well, what one thing would you want for your learning environment? And I'm like, godlike powers. I mean, so I'll have to say,
there we go.
I'll have to say stay virtual or in some kind of game engine, but I want godlike powers, so I can drop down a villa if I want, or
there you go,
create Pompeii.
And we do see, we make one of these, Rebecca and Emeka. We make one of these, and then we hold down the shift key, drag, and we move it over to the side, and then we have two of them. So that's how we get 8 villas or 10 villas or however many we need. These are extensible environments with extensible objects that you create one and you can make many. And there's no additional costs, or, you know, the database is still triggering off the same UUID or database record number for all these objects and their textures. So when you think about the efficiency of it, the way we have made it a more optimal experience from a performance perspective is instead of having separate regions all within the same grid, every major region, which is monster size, by the way, is its own grid. That means it has its own URL and its own port number. And of course, that meant that we had to work with Comcast and say, yo, we need dedicated IP addresses, because otherwise you couldn't self-host like this. Now, if we were doing this for military education, which my research counterpart does for the Air Force, for Air University, when that happens, and we run a global learning forum event or one of these events that involves hundreds or thousands of people, we move all this up into the cloud on the Amazon cloud. So we flip a switch, these databases then move over to the cloud. We have versions of them there. And so we activate it only when we need it. Why? Because we pay for everything ourselves. And so, and you know, I used to call it the power of lunch money, because we saved our lunch money for the first few years, built all our stuff, taught our classes, and then encouraged our universities saying, hey, look what we can do, right? And nothing speaks louder than success. That's one of the reasons I used Kay's philosophy. One of the reasons when I volunteered with the 8th graders for 2 years, I didn't get to attend every day the second year, but I would tell my doctoral students, I'd say, hey, 13-year-olds can do this. Surely you can do it. And of course, some of my doctoral students, they range in ages from, like, let's say 25 to 76. You know, I had one that was very close to 80, one of my oldest graduates. And you might ask yourself, why would that person want to learn new things? What's interesting is I went to his graduation party after graduation, and he said, you know, of all the classes I had, yours challenged me the most. It made me think. It took me outside my comfort zone, and it's the most memorable. I will never forget that. And he says, furthermore, my son works for Elon Musk on the space program. And he says, I took him in to see some of the things we're doing. And I want you to meet him, because it's just this amazing experience you gave me, which helps me to understand his work better. It's because we work on the problem, we work on complex problems using machine learning and AI to understand where the space program is going and how will we ever get to Mars and live, right? How will we make it habitable? how will we do so in an environmentally sound fashion, right? Responsible fashion. I mean, lots of complex problems that are just not possible today. We created a dinosaur world. We had an 8-year-old family member come by to visit one summer, and we said, well, let's create a dinosaur world for him. And some of the dinosaurs you can ride, and some of them do things. And often I'm asked, how long does it take to do this stuff? For my research partner, it took 1 day to adapt existing dinosaur models, and it took 3 to 5 days to put the textures, which is what you see on the outside of them, to get that all in place and get them scripted so they're ready to go. Well, this is our keynoter from 2017 from ELK. This is Barbara Truman. And of course, she's going through really tough times right now. And when we're not feeling well and when we're struggling, to live, our support crew isn't always people. It's not always our students or our administrators or our coworkers. Sometimes it's the people at home with you, right? And of course, we were talking about this yesterday in Diane Siebert's or the evening conference, the 4 o'clock session, which was so wonderful, talking about bridging students from different programs, right? And of course, they were talking about our work environments. Everyone has to get used to the fact that they may hear children, they may hear cats, because you can't put your families on hold just because you're working from home. While we try to, that's just not realistic. So now we have this very natural way of viewing our integrated lifestyle, right? Of course, her cats are listening eagerly. Here we're sitting here on the barge, and every Sunday we get together and we think up new spaces. We've been opening new grids every 2 to 3 weeks, in case you're wondering. And we do this partly for our own mental health so that we stay on fire, stay vibrant, and then we bring these things into our classes. I now have my own Lobo grid where my students come, they work. We hold all our classes there. We also had Moodle, or a learning management system, for posting, content, sharing videos, getting feedback, all the other mechanisms, the FERPA controlled parts of the course. But all of the interactive parts are conducted within these kinds of spaces. This is one of the ladies, the wife of the gentleman who's hosting these environments. And she does a lot of work with horses. She takes miniature horses around her neighborhood to comfort children who are persons with disabilities, maybe in wheelchairs, or the elderly, or folks with dementia, or everyone, right? And she takes them around. She thinks about the value of these virtual spaces. And she gave us these words that we shared 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to share with you is, she is normally not comfortable with these kinds of spaces, and yet she's in here with us, and it has helped our families be part of the learning experience. You know, uh, now our families are critical to our success, right? And of course, here she is with some of her horses. In case, see how small the miniature horse is? That's Molly Mae West. And Molly goes all over the place, but she's also has a role in our virtual worlds. And there's Betty, showing us what life is like at her home. And of course, we had to bring her some horses in the virtual world so that she'd feel at home there too. Well, my goal for today was to stimulate your thinking because, I listen to people say our tools are insufficient. Oh, I'm so tired of this, that, or the other, right? And I think there's never been a more exciting time for us to pose ideas, to publish, and to encourage others to develop, to make these things happen. We don't have to do everything for ourselves. Absolutely not. In fact, in a lot of my worlds, and I could show you examples from student projects from fall if you're interested, let me show you the link for them so you can find them for yourself. All of my stuff I tend to post at slideshare.net/learlobo/presentations, and I'll give you the link for that. There's like 134 sets. They cover diverse topics, including technology, including the tools, and also how we hypergrid. The reason we're using open source environments is because we like to move to other people's worlds where we do not have an account. So here I am with my class, and this is December 2020, and they're giving their class projects. These were people who had never been in a virtual world before. Over half of them had never, they're not game advocates. They don't play games. Up to half of them do. They were in a game design program, so they were excited to be in here. And of course, we were studying virtual reality, which means head-mounted display devices, data gloves, all the gizmos, as well as the content within it. So I started the class there, and then I brought them in here to show them what immersive collaborative design is like. What is it like to create the world while you're standing inside of it? And of course, it put them through different experiences. I'll just skip ahead. They are Benedictines. Kay, you were asking that question. So that's our basis. Here we are the first day in world. And you're right. Figuring out how to move is awkward at first. You use your arrow keys or you use WASD. But if you don't figure it out, you just click on something and sit. And then you can move your camera by using your arrow keys and whip around in circles to look around and get comfortable in your environment. We use a process, and we teach students that first you explore and discover, then you imagine and dream, and then you create. You have to know what you're creating and why it matters for it to have this educational benefit in the sense of whatever course concept I'm teaching, right? So we have to map these things. We have this practical side that, of course, has to be supported. But yeah, here we are. And of course, there was several courses all meeting at the same time, doing all this stuff. And you can look at these yourself. I did a lot of video recordings, even though they didn't necessarily look at the video because everyone came to class. That's like a first, right? Everyone comes, and they built a community garden. They built this themselves. It's a rough little photo. And then they set a lighting on it with a green light. That's why we all look green. They decided that's what they wanted. And yes, their representations of self are dramatically different. This guy on the right's a pirate. The guy on the left created his own avatar, right? And so we had all different types. And yes, that takes you out of your comfort zone because often one of my schools advises me that man is wearing no shirt. I'm like, yeah, this is true. This is true. In a fantasy space, we have to figure out what the rules are. With the 8th graders, we did have rules. They couldn't have bare shoulders or bare midriffs. We abided by the school's rules, and that makes perfect sense. But the students changed their avatars, changed their identities, changed how they felt about each other in the sense of bonding, crossing over boundaries, helping one another, and of course, celebrating. Celebrations were really hard in 2020. It was hard to have time for these things. We did a lot of activities. You're welcome to look at this at your leisure. And of course, this particular set that I was showing you is here. And of course, I do a little walkthrough of some of their projects. Here's our grids, some of them. We started out with 12, and now we have probably 15 or 16 because every 3 or 4 weeks we're adding a new grid. So we have some devoted to the space program, some devoted to dinosaurs and to research. This is my class one. It's called Lobo Grid after my last name in a virtual world. Yeah. And here we are, my students hypergridded, which means they clicked on this sign and they went to locations where they do not have an account. So they cross over other tools so they could go on tours. They could go explore. They could go meet others. They could go shopping for free. And of course, they could gather a lot of resources. They just loved it. Look how eager they are. And of course, they could create things of beauty. This was a surprise to me during the final presentation. They were showing me some of the things they created and how these things worked, and I just loved it. You know, I had given them the textures and materials and stuff, and I was interested to see what they would come up with. And of course, they integrated video and they integrated instruction. They set up bridges between each other's projects to show connectivity. This lady here talked about the importance of skin color and how she feels about herself, you know, finding that sense of realism for her so she could connect with the world and learn better. Let me check my time. It looks like I have 5 minutes. Now, I had given her skins a variety of colors, but what it is she didn't realize how they would look until she really tried them out. I take aerial views thinking about how students create things. They created a monster maze. I don't know if you can see it here. And of course, they started teaching data structures and various scientific classes, some of them. The guy without a shirt here is Bruce Lee, in case you're wondering. So he's modeling one of his heroes, right? Yep. And of course, he's teaching very technical subjects. And some of the students are from sociology, psychology, other disciplines, who, of course, are learning something, right, during our poster presentations. And they're all trying to figure out, how did he do it? This is the maze, right? See how the maze is forming the very, very tall structures and all this content. Of course, I took a few aerials looking at it, watching them develop it, how they pulled things together. What I was interested in is how they synthesized all these tools and techniques, and what were going to be the takeaways from these lessons. What were they going to use in the future, and how would this become their integrated set of tools? One thing of interest is, in our research, we use the virtual world as a design space, and then we port our work to Unity 3D or to another tool so that we can get it on a mobile device or get it on easier to distribute and disseminate forms of technology. So we don't just think in terms of one space, right? Now, of course, they love The Simpsons. So one of the projects modeled The Simpsons and Itchy and Scratchy and others, right? So they have all this very colorful, very bright, and of course a little garish, but fun. Just a high element of fun. And of course, it was near Christmas time, so some of them started wearing Christmas lights as if they were the Christmas tree, right? Decorating themselves with some of this stuff. And of course, after class, I've never had so many students stay after class and we would dance. I would kick off a dance device. They would self-select to participate, and it would synchronize our movements, and we would dance and swirl, and we'd do acrobatics. Okay, we'd fly above the ground, and we'd do all these things that freed the spirit. And then, of course, we'd sit around a table and just chat over coffee or whatnot. And class ended at 9:30 at night, in case you're wondering. So it was not, they would hang in. I'd have to chase them out. Anyway, so that's how one of the classes went. I love the dancing off of the ground. And I love all of these experiences. Anyway, lots of different kinds of content, lots of different sources. You're welcome to use any of my materials in any of your work, including the images. I try to create most of my images these days from our work. And of course, I have 14, 15 years of work on here. So you're welcome to use any of it. And I'll give you that link again and say thank you to our organizers and ask if there are any last minute questions. Did I miss anything in the text chat? Oh, sorry, I missed Rebecca leaving. Rebecca, take care. And thank you, David, for joining us, Megan, Ross, Dan. You know, I don't know what you're thinking about for your ideal learning environment. Please realize it doesn't have to be visual. It's however you establish community, share concepts, have this cooperative way of working and thinking and learning. See, I like cognitive apprenticeship where I demonstrate and then I work alongside students where they can drop in at any time while I have my office hours, but not I'm tinkering, and they can be with me, right? We have this participatory community feel, and that is very powerful. Well, thank you. Hey, Megan. Well, it's been recorded, plus the slides are online. Let me give you, they're the last set, of course, in this set here, right? And we're also going to put them in Discord too. And I take you through a journey of thinking about learning theories and thinking about all the things that matter to us, realism and connections and authentic assessment, accessibility, all those things. And we're not abandoning any of them. We're just saying that wouldn't it be nice if our home lives, we still were able to preserve and carve out some of our private identity, right? As well as our wonderful learning space. And so we started dreaming, what would you have in your home life if your home life was everything you needed it to be, including work and social? What would that be like, right? Okay, we're at the end of time. Thank you. Over to you, Bill.
All right, thank you very much for presenting. Go ahead and stop the recording now.